Yeah.
Okay, I believe this is session 5 already of this series on sacred seasons. And this time we are talking about New Year festivals. I'm very excited about this. I found a lot of really interesting, cool stuff for us to talk about. So
Oh, good.
you will definitely leave here with something interesting that you've learned.
Good.
All right, but let's start out before we get into any actual festivals. Let's start out with some introductions. I want to talk a little bit about what is a year because I think we can make some assumptions, but not necessarily the right ones. And when we're looking at other cultures and other traditions, we want to make sure that we are open to possibilities. So, what is a year? Well, we've got the tropical year, which is one trip around the sun, one set of our tilted axis pointing in all the different ways toward the sun so that we can get our different seasons, which then brings us to the agricultural year. That gives us the cycle of those seasons and allows our crops to grow in the timing that they typically do. Then we've got the lunar year, which is 12 cycles of the moon, approximately 354 solar days of the year. So it's not quite the same year, but that exists. Then there's other kinds of years. The academic year, which runs from the first day to the last day of school, which does not cover, the full tropical year, the full calendar year, but is considered to be a year in itself. We've got the fiscal year, which usually does cover a full calendar year, but sometimes will run from July 1st through June 30th or September 1st through August 31st, something like that, for a corporation to be able to file its taxes and to keep track of its growth over time, things like that. We've got program years, often similar to academic years, where you are running a particular program for children or of classes or something like that. And then we, in the Christian tradition, have our liturgical year, which we're actually going to talk about some interesting stuff related to that, even within Christian traditions toward the end of our time together here. But the marking of time in that yearly cycle is something that we do in a variety of areas in our life. And so um, we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind some of these different things. Some of them are, more natural in terms of, the experience of our ancestors who experienced their relationship to the sun and their relationship to the growing of food. Others are more culturally or socially constructed, like an academic year or a fiscal year. But we, of course, depending on the culture you come from, um, you come up with different explanations and different experiences of the concept of a year. Can anyone think of any other types of year that I missed?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, I was curious just because, I'm me. And so I wanted to look at where does the word year come from and how can that help us to understand the human understanding of the year as it developed. And so I learned that our word year comes from all the way back in the Proto-Indo-European, which is the mother language of almost all the languages from um, Persian and um, Farsi to German and English and everything in between. All of these have an ancestor in this Proto Indo European language. And they had this word year Rome or something. It doesn't really matter how you pronounce it. And that means year. But it is derived in Proto Indo European from another word that is a verb, which means to go or to move. And so, conceptually, for people several thousand years ago, the idea of a year is connected with movement, which kind of makes sense. It's, a recognition of the passage of time. It's perhaps a recognition of the movement of the sun in the sky, the recognition of the different patterns of our lives, the change which is reflected in that movement. We've also got some other possibilities that can help us to kind of think about how our ancestors understood these words. Um, the Greek and the Latin come from a root that is connected to the word old. And so the year is for in our exploration through the PIE, we have this sense of movement. In the Greek and Latin roots, we have this connection to the concept of oldness, of age, of history. And so years are not just something that is happening now, but are something that pass, something that is kind of behind us. Um, some some languages that we even still have today in our world um, don't have a word for year, but they count time by the season, and so they talk about this is summer, and then there will be winter, and then there will be harvest. Um, Mandarin has a word that translates as year, nian, but uh, the form of this Mandarin character comes from an earlier concept ideograph that meant harvest. So you can kind of see if you look at that character next to the Mandarin there that it reads Nian in Mandarin. But if you look at it, you can kind of see it almost looks like a stalk, right? That you've got the upright part of the stalk, and then you've got kind of pieces shooting off of it. And so originally the image was referring to the harvest, and a lot of Mandarin um, characters are descendants of images that kind of look like the thing that it is depicting or is referring to. So, for example, the Mandarin character for cow, if you trace back in the scripts into the past, it actually looks like a cow at one point with, it has horns and it's kind of scoopy. And so then you can kind of watch as it transforms into the current character, but you can kind of see that relationship. When my kids were taking Mandarin, when during COVID, I watched lots of videos with them about these characters, and it kind of showed the morphing of the letter from a picture of a cow into the shape of the Mandarin character to help them to kind of visualize that, since they were young children learning a different language. And so um, Mandarin speakers would have originally connected the cycle of the year specifically with the harvest. And so a year is the time it takes to get from one harvest to the next. And that, I think, we've lost a lot of these connections, certainly as time goes on in the development of language. But I think it's helpful and interesting for us to look back at these things, because there was a time when speakers of of these languages or earlier versions of these languages did have those conceptual connections between their understanding of what a year is and the roots from which it comes. And so if you were a speaker of Proto-Indo-European, you understood that a year was connected to that movement. And how is that different? How does that make your brain kind of think about and understand a year differently than if you are a speaker of Latin and are connecting that concept of year with age, with oldness, and et cetera. So I think that's kind of interesting to think about. Any questions or comments on that?
Nope.
All right. Um, so then finally, before we get into talking about some examples of New Year celebrations in different cultures and different religions, I wanted to just talk a little bit too about um, the differences in how years are numbered. So, we use the Gregorian calendar that most of quote unquote Western civilization uses. But it's not the only one. There are a variety of different ways to calculate and count the years. And so here are just a couple of concepts related to this. So there is a term in the study of time passing, the study of calendaring, called an epoch and or an epoch. And this word is used in other places and with I think slightly different uh, uh, meaning. But in the case of this scientific study, this is referring to an instant in time, a reference point for the purpose of beginning a calendaring era, a counting era. And so it's usually an event that is chosen. And that event, of course, is a very important event in the life of the community that is using that calendar. So, for example, we have our calculations have you in the past, and some communities still continue to use AD, Anno Dominum, in the year of our Lord. And so that refers to how many years has it been since the approximate year that we have calculated was the birth of our Lord, or Jesus Christ. But there are other calendar designations. Uh, the AM is for the Hebrew calendar, and this is Anno Mundi, since the creation of the world, the birth of the earth. Um, AH is since the year of the Hidraj, which we will talk a lot more about later when we get to that particular festival for the Islamic New Year. And then BS is for Bengali Sambat, which is the calculation for the Bengali calendar, which began in the year 593, 594 in our calendar. And it commemorated the first independent king of the unified Bengali. And so it was an important um, an important moment because it was the first time that the Bengali people were um, ruled by one king and unified um, an independent kingdom. And so you can see, these are all obviously important concepts either for religious communities or for cultural communities that they kind of decide together, hey, this is the beginning of something important, and so from now on we're going to count where we are in relationship to that event, how long it's been since then, and that's how we're going to reference the passage of time. Any comments, questions on any of that?
Where did CE come from all of a sudden? Maybe it
That
isn't all of us.
that was just an attempt to secularize the concept. It doesn't change um, the numbering system so much, but with the Enlightenment and with the Age of Reason and with the diversification of religion, um, it is a recognition that not everyone is a Christian, and also in some ways a recognition that the year that they chose for the birth of Jesus is incorrect. And if we can calculate the birth of Jesus, he was probably actually born in the year 4. um, and so I think it's a little bit of a combination of both of those things.
Has it really been around since the Enlightenment?
Um, I think so in terms of, small groups of people using it, but then over the course of time, kind of, it takes a long time for these things to popularize and start to be
Yeah.
used, in common culture. All right, are we ready to pop into some different different things here? So obviously, when we're talking about New Year traditions, we have to talk about the standard New Year's experience that we all have. Now, of course, in American culture, the New Year is not a particularly religious celebration. It's more of a cultural, secular celebration. But everybody's got their little tweaks and little quirks to it. So I thought that what we could do is everybody could share their favorite weird New Year's tradition that either they used growing up or they've heard about, or maybe their spouse brought into their family that they think is kind of odd. Not everybody at once.
I'm I'm signing in on my iPad.
That is the most unique New Year's tradition I've ever heard.
I don't know. This is weird. Mike, I'm sorry.
I think the one that Angela, well, in Alaska, they do 4th of July fireworks on New Year's Eve or at New Year's Eve
Uh-huh.
because it's too light on the 4th of July to appreciate the fireworks. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do. Wait a minute.
You have two instances open. Try to shut down your phones.
There we go.
There you go.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah, you should
There
be
we go.
fine. Yeah.
Unusual New Year's. Well, New Year's Day, being from the South, we have to have Hoppin' John, which is the black eyed peas and rice. And
Yes, of course. Collard green.
I like it, but nobody else does. But they all have to eat it.
Most years, that's what I do is field greens, black eyed peas, and cornbread,
Absolutely.
and absolutely no sugar in the cornbread.
Absolutely. A true Southerner.
Pour sorghum
I'm German, so I have to eat sauerkraut on New Year's Day for luck.
Well, same idea, just a little more sour of the green.
Yes.
Yeah, the black eyed peas are supposed to be for luck and the greens are for money.
Mm. Well, the sauerkraut is not my favorite New Year tradition though, because I have to share this. I have to share my roots with you. So everybody knows that in New York City, they drop the ball and it falls down and it hits the bottom right as the new year occurs. And so where I come from in central Pennsylvania, there are dozens of little towns, little hamlets that try to maintain their own unique identity, even in the face of suburban sprawl. And every one of these little towns has to have their own thing that they drop. So, Hershey, Pennsylvania, which most people have heard of, they have a Hershey Kiss that they drop on New Year's Eve. And Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, has a dill pickle that they drop. And so, what I have for you here in my picture is from the town where Bob and I lived before we moved to California, where our children were born. This is Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and so they drop a wrench.
Hysterical.
So it's quite amusing. Every little town has their thing. Um, but there's lots of different traditions. Um, there are several different. I think this is this is a tradition that originated in Spain, perhaps. But you have to eat a grape for every chime of the bell up to
Yeah.
midnight, and so eventually you have 12 grapes stuffed in your mouth because you don't have enough time to chew and swallow the first one before you pop the second one in there. Uh,
Yep.
of course, we have the Rose Bowl and the Tournament of Roses parade that have been held since 1890, and Cindy has all kinds of stories about that and how that worked and how all of that had evolved and by the time she was in high school and college. Um, the football game wasn't added until 1902, but the parade itself started in 1890 by the Pasadena Valley Hunt Club because of the sunshine that they experienced in the wintertime to kind of show off to the rest of the country that they had warm and sun and flowers and other places didn't. Um, and of course, football and parades are traditional on New Year's Day in a lot of places now. Um, but there are lots of different countries around the world. Most countries, I would say, have some kind of recognition of the new year related to the Gregorian calendar. And so I wrote down a few things that just kind of make each unique that I thought I would share with you. Several different countries in Africa and Europe play a message from the president as a greeting, either on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Several different African countries have church services and fireworks. I like this one. In Tunisia, you have to stay up until midnight and eat cake as the new year arrives. So as you hit midnight, you have to eat cake. I thought that was pretty good. I'm on board with that.
Oh, me too.
um, in Mongolia, um, because they were formerly part of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was a country that did this. They play the national anthem. Of course, now they play the national anthem of Mongolia, not the national anthem of the Soviet Union, at midnight on television following a holiday address by the president. So the president speaks until midnight, and then they play the national anthem right as the new year begins. In the Philippines, people wear polka dotted clothing. They believe that circles attract money, and so you wear polka dots to attract money in the new year, and then you also eat sweets or fruit to represent a sweeter year ahead. So I thought that was an interesting one. In Saudi Arabia, the celebration of the quote Western New Year was banned until 2016. And so if shops tried to sell New Year's related products, they could get confiscated. The religious police did not actually fine or arrest anyone if they were found holding private celebrations of the new year. But until 2016, you weren't supposed to do that, and now I guess it's all right to participate in that kind of thing. In Belgium, there is a particularly well-watched television show in which they choose a stand-up comedian who is going to review the year in review by a comedian, and then they have a variety show that goes until midnight. In Estonia, they have traditions that you should eat 7, 9, or 12 times on New Year's Eve because those are lucky numbers. And for each meal that is consumed, you gain the strength of that many men in the following year. So you have to eat 12 meals on New Year's Eve so that you can gain the strength of 12 men. But you're not supposed to completely finish any of the meals. You have to leave some food on your plate, and that is for ancestors and spirits who visit the house on New Year's Eve. So that's a tradition there. Lots of countries do some version of the king's pie where you cut up the pie and everybody gets a slice, and the person that ends up with the little piece of, the king-shaped, the crown-shaped piece or the coin or something gets to be the king for the week, or is responsible for bringing the pie next year, or is going to have luck for the next year. There are a variety of different versions of that that you can see around the world. In El Salvador, I thought this was kind of interesting. In El Salvador, you have fireworks, but you also have effigies that people make, and they are called Año Viejo, or Old Year. And what you do is you create this effigy using scraps of paper, old clothes. You can buy them ready-made, and you put it outside your front door. And at midnight, you set it on fire. And the effigy is supposed to represent something that you hated about the departing year. And so it is very popular to see celebrities and politicians and public servants and cartoon characters, and they set them on fire to banish them in the new year and start afresh for the next year. I thought that was that's pretty clever.
Dora's laughing and shaking her head. Yes, all of that.
I like that. I would love to participate in that someday.
Yeah, really.
In Chile, you are supposed to watch fireworks while wearing yellow underwear because yellow is a color, a lucky color. So I don't know why it has to be underwear, but yellow underwear. And in Ecuador, apparently there is a New Year's tradition that men dress in drag to represent the widows of the past year. And they dance in the streets, and drivers who pass by have to pay them a toll in order to get past them. And so hopefully they give that money to the widows and they don't just keep it for themselves. But it sounds like a fun activity.
Like some of the Halloween
those
parties.
were some of the things that I found. Anything else anybody wants to share about traditional Western New Year like that we recognize on January 1st? Obviously, we've got drinking and fireworks and making New Year's resolutions, all those things that are traditional at that time of year.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think I've got some more locations for my bucket list, though. For the
Yes, and you have to go on a particular day of the year so that you can participate in these things.
I don't know where you get yellow underwear though.
I guess they make it special for this. I don't know. There was another one that you have to wear red underwear because red is the lucky color in that country. So I don't know what the
Wow.
deal is with underwear. I mean, a red shirt, fine, but why does your underwear have to be red? I don't know.
I don't know either.
All right, so moving on to the next New Year festival. This is one I happen to know a little bit about as well because of my children studying Mandarin and learning a little bit about Chinese culture. So this is Chunjie, which is the Spring Festival. And this is the marking of the end of winter and the beginning of spring. So this is the understanding of the new year takes place in the spring rather than on January 1st. And the idea, of course, connecting it to the renewal of springtime and the the it's time for heart planting and things are coming alive again, things like that. And so the understanding is in Chinese culture that this is the beginning of a new year. um, it is held on the 15th day of the year, but in China the year is based on a lunisolar calendar, and so their calendar doesn't quite match up with ours. And so it has to do with the new moon, and it is the Chinese New Year is on the first day of the new moon that appears between January 21st and February 20th in any given year, one of our years. And there's a legend that goes along with the founding of Chunjie. It is that there was a mythical beast called the Nian, and Nian also happens to mean year in Chinese, in Mandarin. And the Nian is a beast that lives under the sea in some versions or in the mountains. And it looks kind of like a lion with horns on it. And it would come out, especially during the springtime, and it would eat the villagers, especially their children, in the middle of the night. And so the villagers were terrified of this as the spring festival came around each year. And so one year, all the villagers decided that they were going to hide from the beast so that the beast could not eat any of them. And an older man appeared before the villagers before to talk to them before they went into hiding. And he said that he would stay in the village overnight and he would get revenge on the Nian while they hid. And what the old man did was he put up red papers, which were said to scare the Nian, and set off firecrackers. And the day after, the next morning, the villagers came back to their town and they saw that nothing had been destroyed. And they assumed that the old man who had saved them was some kind of god. But the Nian never came back. And so they understood that the Nian was afraid of the color red, afraid of the loud noises of the firecrackers. And so every year, from then on, the villagers wore red clothing and they hung red lanterns, and they would hang scrolls of red on the windows and doors and use firecrackers and drums to frighten away the Nian so that it never came back to the village. So this is the story of where this festival came from. So there's lots of drumming and firecrackers setting off, and there's lots and lots of red everywhere. Red is the traditional color of celebration in China. This tradition there's evidence of it as far back as about 200 BC in writing, and so it's probably a little bit older than that. And there has always been some kind of connection of it to ancestor worship or ancestor veneration, which is something that continues with some traditional Chinese even today. Some of the traditions that go along with this, I already mentioned firecrackers, the scrolls that people hang on either side of their door have special poetry couplets that are very complicated. In Mandarin, there are different tones that you have to use to give meaning to the words that you're saying so that you could say the same, you could vocalize the same thing, but if the tone is higher or lower, it has a completely different meaning. And these poems that they write have kind of relationships with the sounds that you have to use in order to write the poem the correct way. So it's kind of a complicated thing, but it's a traditional sort of poetry in China. Lots and lots of red, of course. Children receive the gift of a red envelope that has money in it. People eat dumplings and sweet rice balls and noodles, which represent long life since the noodles are long. And there are some traditional songs that children will sing that go along with the spring festival that my children learned when they were younger. The dragon and lion dances are popular and common during the spring festival because the beats of the drum that they dance to are there to scare off the Nian or scare off any kind of evil spirits that might bother them. And this is understood to be the time that the new year begins, the new cycle, or the new year within the 12-year cycle of the Chinese zodiac years. So each year in the 12-year cycle is associated with an animal. And as the 12-year cycle goes through, you are born in a particular year related to one of these animals, and then you're supposed to, have a particular personality. So this coming year, 2026, the New Year festival, the Spring Festival doesn't occur until February 17th. It's a pretty late this year. But at that time, we will transition from the year of the snake into the year of the horse. And people who are born in the year of the horse are said to be honest, outspoken, and easygoing people. So if anybody has a baby this year, then that's the personality that they'll hopefully have. Any questions about Spring Festival?
Well, one thing I've always wondered, in your research, did you find out, because it used to be that our calendar used to start in March, not in January. And it makes sense when you look at December meaning 10 and October meaning, 8 and November, I assume 9 and September being 7, that we used to start in March, but then we switched over to January. Do you know, in your research, did you ever figure out why? Because I've always wondered that question of how we
I didn't look
shifted our new year.
into that in particular. That was the transition from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, is when that happened.
Okay.
So just, different new, I don't know exactly why they decided to address that, but, no calendar is ever perfect. And it's, over the course of time, it kind of gets messed up, and then they come up with some new way to calculate how long a year is. And, we put in leap years and all these things.
I mean, it just seems strange to go from using spring as your season to start the calendar and instead using winter.
Yeah.
Because January 1st is just, a week away from the start of a little more than a week away.
I think it has something to do with the rise of Christendom and the birth of Jesus being connected and being close by to that date. And also,
okay. I hadn't thought about that. That might be the reason for trying to start the calendar there.
Yeah.
Is the Chinese New Year the same thing as Tet?
No.
Okay.
Similar.
I have a Chinese sister-in-law. We used to celebrate Chinese New Year, and I've always kind of melded the two together, but I guess they're not, huh?
Yes. Different cultures have kind of steal from each other, and I guess it depends. How far apart do you have to go with your own version of somebody else's tradition, and before it becomes its own tradition? We're actually going to talk about that in just a second, because we're going to talk about a holiday that comes from Zoroastrianism, but has been kind of co-opted by the Baha'i. So it's a lot of things are going to be, have a lot of overlap because people steal from each other, but then they, slowly kind of make it their own as time goes on. But yeah, technically not the same thing. All right, I talked a little bit about the Bengali calendar year, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about their new year and how they celebrated and why a little bit more in detail. So this is Bohela Boizak, and it is the Bengali New Year. It takes place on April 14th or April 15th, depending on where exactly you are and whether there's a leap year in the Gregorian calendar on that particular year. And it is a festival that is based on the spring harvest. And so that again is another example of a calendar that begins in the spring. In Bengali, the word Bohela means first, and Boizak means is the first month in the Bengali calendar, and so this is just the first. The new year is the first of the first month is what that literally means. The exact reason for choosing this as their new year has to do with the rule of the Mughal Empire. The land taxes were collected from the Bengali people according to the Islamic calendar, and it was a lunar calendar. And the new year did not coincide, therefore, with the solar cycles of agriculture. And so the trouble was that people were taxed, but it was far away from when the harvest had taken place, when they actually had some money that they could use to pay their taxes with, because that's where, if you're in an agricultural society, that's where you get all your money for the entire year is from the harvest. And so during the rule of Emperor Akbar, still in that Mughal empire, but one of these emperors decided to change the tax year to coincide with the harvest. And so he asked an astronomer to create a new calendar that combined the lunar Islamic calendar with the solar Hindi calendar that was already in use. And this became the Bengali calendar that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about different ways of calculating the year. So this is almost like a fiscal year kind of based calendar. The idea being that it has to do with opening of a new ledger for the new year, and kind of reconciling last year's accounts. Things like that are done even today by business people and shopkeepers and traders, so that there's a new beginning. There is even in some areas a tradition of letting all of the debts of customers and shopkeepers go from the previous year so that you can start fresh in a new year. And in some ways that's helpful because you can, not stop having to harass people for the money that they owe you, and you can kind of keep everything, put it back to zero, and not have to have all these negative and positive balances in there that you're trying to work out and reconcile. But then, of course, people might take advantage of that if they know that it's coming and, they choose not to pay or something. So it's got its pros and cons to it, I guess. People during this time tend to wear red and white. And the reason for that is because traditionally the ledgers that were used for the shopkeepers had red covers with white pages, and so they're actually dressing in a way to represent the ledgers. So it's definitely a festival that is connected to the paying of taxes and economics and things like that very closely. The pictures I have here are mostly of the fairs and festivals that take place on this first day of spring. Fairs are usually held by different local towns and municipalities where they have sales booths and in the market they have people selling books to food to clothing, all kinds of different things like that. Traditionally, fairs were held under banyan trees, and traders from all over the place would come to sell. There would be rides that were built. So there's a picture of a boy riding on a kind of merry-go-round type of wooden thing there for children. There are different types of food that are sold out of stalls that are popular for the time of year. And one of the earliest movie projectors in the Indian subcontinent, called a bioscope, was introduced at one of these fairs, and then became popular for young children to watch. And it was kind of a movie projector, an early type of movie projector that was very popular, and people got to watch a movie, so to speak, during this time, which was a special treat for them. Those were some things that I found about this one. Questions, comments?
So, yeah, we use the Gregorian calendar to help us determine when these other festivals take place. Do people from those cultures also use the Gregorian calendar to determine when their festival is going to happen?
No,
but it's a device we use to help us understand when it is.
yes. So we give ourselves that connection so that we understand when approximately it's taking place. So when I say that, something takes place on April 15th, we know, oh, well, that's, a time of year when it's warm, it's springtime, things like that, versus like if I tell you that something happens in September, then we know what that means. But if I tell you that something takes place on, the 3rd of Nisan, you're not going to know what that means because we don't use those months. And so we don't have that kind of cultural knowledge. So that's the only reason that I do that. But, and some have especially in the bigger cities, they have some sense of the passage of time in a variety of, everybody has lots of different calendars that they follow, right? But there are, some countries where there are these different understandings of New Year. They still have they still celebrate some version of January 1st being a type of New Year worldwide that is recognized, but then they also have their own recognition as well. So, like for example, in Israel, the New Year, of course, goes with the Jewish calendar, Rosh Hashanah, which I'll talk about as part of this. But then there's also the Western New Year on January 1st. And so in order to differentiate the two, instead of calling that New Year, because Rosh Hashanah is New Year, they call it Sylvester. And that's because the feast of Saint Sylvester in the Christian liturgical calendar falls on January 1st.
Well, I assume it's very similar to how, we operate both on the American standard unit of measure and metric. We very much exist in two separate worlds, but kind of jive with it. I assume they do the same thing with their calendar is that they exist at two different states, despite them being the same thing, doing the same function.
So we are in we're in winter right now in terms of our seasonal calendar. We're in January in terms of our Gregorian calendar. we are in the season after Epiphany in terms of our liturgical calendar. So it's just kind of another calendar that they, that people add to their repertoire, so to speak, that they know about the, more or less international calendar, but that they kind of live their lives based on their own understanding of the passage of time.
I can say that I can't see any situation in which Americans would party this hard on April 15th.
It's true. All right, so let's talk about Nowruz. So this is the one that I was telling you about is kind of a borrowing of culture. So this is originally Nowruz was, or I guess still sort of is, it's a very small group of people anymore, but it's an ancient Persian holiday that was part of Zoroastrianism. There are only two festivals mentioned by Zoroaster, the founder of Zoroastrianism, and this is one of them. And so it was celebrated as a holy day by Zoroastrians. And as time has gone on, Persians, or now Iranians, commonly celebrate Nowruz as a secular holiday. So it's no longer considered a religious holiday in Iran because they are Muslims now, for the most part. But there is a kind of secular connection still to this holiday that is celebrated. So the bottom picture there is a dance that's being done in celebration of Nowruz in Iran. But the Baha'i people also celebrate Nowruz, and it is celebrated along with the Persians, but is not just a secular holiday, but it is considered a religious high holy day as well. So Nowruz takes place on the spring equinox. So for us, that's March 21st. So again, one that's connected to spring, the renewal, beginning of things, which of course is seems to make a lot more sense, like we said, than randomly in the middle of winter, like we do. Baha'is see Nowruz as a time of spiritual renewal. Nowruz actually is the last the day after the end of a 19-day fast that is part of their ritual calendar, and so it's understood to be a time for spiritual development and kind of spring cleaning, both spiritually and physically, to make space for new things in your soul and in your home. There are not very many large Baha'i populations anywhere in the world. They're pretty small, but they appear everywhere. But if there is a community that has a large enough population, there are 9 holy days in Baha'i religion on which there is no work, and this is one of them. So it's understood to be a big deal. Because of the connection to kind of spiritual development and growth, there's also a connection to relationship building. And so it's a time when people will try to develop and tighten their relationships with each other as well. And so you have a lot of sending of cards to people, kind of similar to what our culture has done during Christmas time, where we send Christmas cards to each other to catch up and let everybody know how our year has gone, even if we haven't talked to them in a year, things like that. And people get together for a lot of meals as well. So within the Baha'i faith, it is understood that Nowruz isn't just something that they borrowed from another culture. It is actually kind of reinterpreted and reinvested with meaning. Um, the the Nowruz is called the Day of God, and it's associated with the future prophet that was written about in their holy book. And that the future prophet is called He Whom God Shall Make Manifest. And this is associated with a man named um, Baha'u'llah. And so they understand that this is an event not just of historical value, but of future value as well, in terms of a time of renewal, a time that God kind of sets in place a new set of standards, a new prophet who will guide them into a future understanding and a future type of relationship um, with God. So just like there was Jesus, the Baha'i believe that Jesus is one of these prophets, that Muhammad is one of these prophets, and then they've also got this third person, Baha'u'llah, who claimed that he was this prophet, and um, was he was born in 1817 and died in 1892. Um, so, like I said, the for the Baha'i, this festival is the breaking of a 19-day fast, and part of the breaking of the fast involves um, a, a collection of S-related foods. So there are seven foods that start with the letter S. And I'm not going to read these to you because they're all in languages that I can't read, and I don't want to destroy them when I'm talking about them. But basically, they're all S related foods, and you can see some of them there on the table. And the point being that you make a beautiful table using these S related foods, and and then your visitors come and participate in this traditional meal with you. Um, so you can kind of see it's interesting because there's a longer history to this, but the borrowing of tradition from Zoroastrianism and kind of the reconfiguration of it to fit beliefs of a completely different religious tradition makes it, makes it interesting and kind of have layer upon layer. And so the fact that it has the same name, of course, gives it a much closer connection, but it kind of shows us how so much of our culture is something that is borrowed and shared and slowly kind of morphs over time until we get to a point where we don't even recognize the source of it necessarily. So any questions on this one or comments?
Is a lot of the Baha'i faith derived from Zoroastrianism?
It's a mixture, in my understanding. I don't know if someone of the Baha'i faith would agree with me necessarily, but my take on it is that it is a mixture of Islam and Christianity and Zoroastrianism and lots of different tidbits from here and there. It was the founder of the Baha'i faith was someone from Iran. So it makes sense that they would, borrow major holidays from Iran, from Zoroastrianism. But it's a fairly new faith. Like I said, the major prophet was around in the mid 1800s, and the founder of the Baha'i religion was murdered, was killed for his differing faith. And after he died, it wasn't until after he died that he became a major figure in the Baha'i religion as kind of, in similar way to Jesus, that, once you're dead, then people can kind of use you to rally people around your cause.
Yeah, I was just curious because I don't know if there still exists, but there used to be a Baha'i group in the Round Mountain, Montgomery Creek area.
I don't know about that, but I do know that there is a Baha'i group in Reading proper, that they are part um, of the Shasta Interfaith group. But it's interesting to speak with. I don't have a chance to speak with them much, but it's there's definitely some interesting stuff going on that you can see a lot of threads of Christianity in there. But you can see lots of other threads as well, and so it's interesting to see how it kind of all brings different concepts together. Anything else? Okay, moving right along here. So now we can talk about the Jewish tradition, the Jewish festival Rosh Hashanah, which means head of the year. Um, this is an interesting one, really, in contrast to the other ones we've talked about, because unlike other New Year's celebrations, this is not a party. This is not a celebration. In the same kind of understanding of the word celebration. Rosh Hashanah is a time for contemplation, a time for introspection, more so than drinking and rabble rousing. The words Rosh Hashanah do not appear in the Bible in terms of what what goes on as part of this festival. But there is a mention of the high holy days in Leviticus chapter 23 that says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelites, saying, In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall observe a day of complete rest, a holy convocation commemorated with trumpet blasts. You shall not work at your occupations, and you shall present the Lord's offering by fire. And so Rosh Hashanah is understood to be this festival because of the timing of it, because it does take place on the first day of the 7th month of the Jewish calendar. And so it's understood that this holiday was pretty well established by the 6th century BC or BCE, which was right around the time of the return from exile. But it doesn't show up in writing until about 200 AD or CE in terms of written evidence of its celebration. So the celebration of Rosh Hashanah in terms of our calendar is not in the spring or in the middle of winter. It's in the early autumn of the Northern Hemisphere. And it is part of the series of high holy days for the Jewish people. And so there's Rosh Hashanah that begins 10 days of repentance, and then that culminates in Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which we're going to talk about next month when we talk about repentance and sin-related festivals. So it's a kind of whole connection of important days in the Jewish year. But Rosh Hashanah itself is a 2-day observance. Like I said, on that starts on the first day of the seventh month in the year, um, in the Jewish calendar, and it is understood to mark um, the beginning of the civil year rather than the beginning of the ecclesiastical year. So in Judaism, there are actually four different New Year's observations, 4 different years, 4 different calendars that are observed. So Rosh Hashanah is a year um, for civic um, understanding. So it's a year that begins a new legal cycle, a new contract year, things like that. Um, and Rosh Hashanah is traditionally understood to be connected to the creation of Adam and Eve. So the celebration of the beginning of humanity's role in God's world. So it kind of, those two things kind of make sense to go together. The beginning of the civic year, the beginning of the work year, so to speak, goes along hand in hand with the celebration of the creation of humanity and their work, their role in the world that God has created. But because Rosh Hashanah is also connected to these days of repentance toward Yom Kippur, it is also understood as kind of the call to return to God, the call to return to an understanding of who God is. And so it is seen as a time where God is kind of renewed in the position of kingship. So it's a kind of a coronation anniversary celebration in a way. So there are all these kind of different threads that are connected together in this, and then that is differentiated from the other calendars. The second one is the beginning of the month of Nisan, which is the spring, somewhere in March or April. And that's the beginning of the ecclesiastical year. So we've got the civic year in Rosh Hashanah, we've got the ecclesiastical year in Nisan. Then we've got the first of Elul, which is the new year for animals. And this is the beginning of a taxation period for tithing of animals. And the reason why this was chosen, it corresponds approximately to August, September. And that is because all of the animals that were born in the spring, you wait until they grow up enough to know that they're going to survive. And then it's easier to count the number of animals in your herd and make that 10% tithe so that you can, move forward. And then the fourth new year is Tu B'Shvat, which is the new year for plants. Trees are taxed in terms of the tithing of fruits and nuts traditionally in ancient Israel, and they ran that year starting in January or February because that's when the wet season in the Mediterranean ended. And so most of the year's rainfall had occurred. It was the time when everything was as green and lush as it was going to get. And so that's kind of the year, that's the time of year when you would be able to, afford to tithe on your fruit trees and your plants. So 4 different calendars because of 4 different reasons. So seeing how, all of these things fit together. But there is evidence in, of even some of this stuff that a fruit tree or nut tree there's a prohibition against taking fruit or nuts from a tree that is younger than 3 years old. And the year, even no matter when you planted it or no matter when it sprung forth from its seed, the year for the tree is counted based on this new year for trees. And so you have to give it 3 years to grow before you can start to pull from it. So all of these different days, but Rosh Hashanah is understood to be kind of the the New Year recognition, because it is also the day of judgment. It's the day that God passes judgment on all of creation, and during this period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And so there's this call for the trumpet blast, the shofar. I have a picture there of the shofar being blown, and there's kind of a dual purpose to this. First, it is kind of a call to repentance, a call to pay attention, a call to wake up, to examine yourself, because God is going to judge you, and you want to be as ready as possible for that. But it's also a call to God. It's a reminder to God of kind of the plight of humanity. Come and be our king and help us to to fix our mistakes and things like that. Remember your love for us even when you look at us in judgment and we fall short, kind of thing. So in this judgment, God, writes the names of the righteous in the book of life and condemns the wicked to death. And then they have until Yom Kippur to perform their acts of repentance, so that they can hopefully get out of any trouble that they have gotten themselves in, so to speak. On Rosh Hashanah, people tend to eat apples dipped in honey after saying a special prayer. That's the kind of major ritual related with food. And that's because ancient Jews believed that apples had healing properties, and honey signifies hope for the new year to be sweet. And so Rosh Hashanah often includes a lot of different sweet treats for kind of representing the same thing. And then you've got your challah bread that is traditional on many Jewish holidays. And on the new year, it is baked in a round shape to represent the crown of God, because it's a recognition of the sovereignty of God. So, questions, comments on this one? All right.
It's hard to keep track of all the Jewish holidays.
There are a lot of them, yes. All right, so let's talk about, we just have two more slides of stuff about New Year's, and then we'll wrap it up. So this one is Islamic New Year, the Hijrah. So this is actually not so much a holiday. It is a recognition, but it's not so much a holiday as it is an event, a historical event that is remembered on a particular day in the year. So the Prophet Muhammad was part of a tribe in Mecca called the Quraysh tribe. And when he received visitations from God, and the Quran was written in a cave that he visited many times, he started to share the message that he was receiving from God, and people did not like it. Mecca was a trading trading location. You can see in the picture that isn't great because I wanted to show you the route rather than the whole region. But you can see that this is Saudi Arabia and there's the Red Sea. And so this is, Egypt is on the other side of the Red Sea there. And then Saudi Arabia goes, way over in the eastern direction. And there's um, lots of just barren land, deserts there. But Mecca was a trading city, and the people there had lots of different gods, and kind of allowed each other that diversity and didn't bother anybody. But Muhammad wanted to let everybody know that there was only one God and that you can't worship all these other gods. So people did not like that. So he was he got himself into some pretty big trouble. So he actually had to run away. He asked his cousin to hop in his bed for him and stay to make it look like it was him, which I think was kind of doing a bit of a disservice to his cousin there, because who knows what people could have done to him while he was playing Muhammad. But he then escaped and took a journey to Medina, which was actually had a different name. It was called Yathrib in 622, the year 622 in our calendar is when this happened. And when he arrived in Yathrib, the reason he went there was because they actually invited him. They said, we like what you have to say. We want you to come and hang out with us. And so he arrived there, and they changed the name to Mecca, or to Medina, sorry. And this was the establishment of the first Muslim community, the first community that was governed by Muslim ordinances and precepts. And so, because of this, this is understood to be the beginning of a new epoch, right? A new calendar, a new series of events, a new age, right? And so the Islamic calendar is counted from this event. So it's kind of a big deal. The But it's not just a physical journey from Mecca to Medina that that Muhammad took. It's also kind of a understood to be a spiritual journey, a transformation from selfishness and kind of vices into more virtues, charity and peace and humility. And so this kind of practical event that took place, that this person was being persecuted and needed to flee for his life, kind of became understood to be more of a strategic choice for the purpose of preserving and growing Islam so that they could lay the groundwork for future growth. And then eventually they did actually return to Mecca and conquer Mecca and turn it into a Muslim city as well, which came later. But the goal being to establish Islamic principles like community and justice and faith for an entire community rather than just for individuals within a larger community that was hostile to what it is that they were doing. So this is the event that the Islamic New Year is based on. I was actually interested to learn that it is not common for people to physically take this journey as part of the new year. And that was kind of something that I thought, like, that made sense, right? Like, you could follow in the footsteps of Muhammad and do this thing. It's not something that is typically done. Instead, people are supposed to spend the day in prayer, in contemplation, um, make resolutions for self-improvement, which, certainly is not something that is completely foreign to us. And think about this event and think about its, what it means for your life and for the people, for your community, for the life of your community. So it's considered a period of sacred renewal in many ways, and not a time again for, celebration, for rabble rousing. So more similar to the Jewish understanding of New Year rather than some of the others um, that we've seen. So people will set, kind of resolutions for themselves. Maybe they'll read the Quran more. Maybe they'll, pray better. Be a little more attentive to their daily prayers. Maybe they'll be a little bit more attentive to their almsgiving traditions, things like that. But being intentionally reflective is kind of a goal for this time. Questions on this one? All right. Then we will move on to the last thing here. This is super interesting. I had no idea about this. So I hope that you didn't either. And if you did, then you could tell me that there's something that you knew that I didn't. So I wanted to not just talk about, the secular New Year that we understand, but also the Christian liturgical year and the New Year, because as we understand it in our version of Christianity, the new year begins, the new liturgical year begins with Advent, because we are preparing for the arrival of Jesus' birth. And then we kind of follow our Christian liturgical year follows the life of Jesus. But I learned very interestingly that this is not a universal understanding of the Christian liturgical year, that the Eastern Orthodox actually start their liturgical year on September 1st. Super, super interesting. Super interesting. So of course I had to know why. Why is this? This is very interesting to me. So September 1st is known as the Indiction. And this is because in the Byzantine Empire, they had just kind of taken the Roman Empire's tax cycle, which was called the Indiction, which was a 15-year cycle. And so every 15 years on a certain day, they would tax. And so when Constantine established the Christian empire, he established this 15-year taxation cycle, which began on September 1st. So this was the beginning of the fiscal year. So we thought, maybe that, well, September 1st is kind of the end of summer, and so we decide that this is, the beginning of the school year, and that might be why you have a new, new fiscal year. No, actually goes all the way back to our buddy Constantine in a completely different part of the world, where September 1st isn't quite the dividing line between summer and fall that a lot of maybe more East Coast, but definitely there's this sense that like Labor Day is kind of the end of summer right here, but it's much older than that. So the Byzantine Empire continued this tradition of September 1st being the beginning of a new year, and adopted this as the date of the new year. So the kind of civil year started with September 1st. So then, because the Byzantine Empire had this, then the Byzantine Church kind of started to give religious meaning to this. So there is an understanding that September 1st is the beginning of a new year. It is also a date to commemorate the creation of the world. So you're connecting that liturgical year to the beginning of all things. So for Western Christians, the beginning of the church year is the preparation for the birth of Jesus. For this calendar, the very beginning, September 1st, is the connection to creation, the beginning of everything. There's also a connection with Jesus in that traditionally Eastern Orthodox believe that September 1st was the day that Jesus began his public ministry. So in Luke chapter 4, we have the famous story where Jesus gets up in the synagogue and goes forward, and he unrolls the scroll, and he reads about how the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. And then he rolls it back up, hands it over, and sits down, and everyone is amazed, right? And that's the beginning of Jesus's public ministry. And so in the Eastern Orthodox Church, that event is commemorated on September 1st as well. So it's the beginning of creation, it's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. It is also connected to the harvest and a time of Thanksgiving. It's the end of the summer harvest in a lot of those countries where Orthodox faith is practiced, and so it's connected to the physical harvest, and then therefore the spiritual harvest of our the development of ourselves into more spiritually mature people, things like that. But then here's the part that's super fascinating to me. So we've got, September 1st being about creation and about Jesus' public ministry. But when you look at the 12 great feasts that fall in the Eastern Orthodox liturgical calendar and the order in which they appear, if you understand that September 1st is the first day of the year, then the first great feast is not the nativity of Christ like it is for us in the West. It's actually the nativity of the Theotokos, which is the Christ carrier, Mary. So the first major festival in the liturgical year of the Eastern Orthodox Church is the birth of Mary. And then it goes into other ones that are more familiar to us, like Christmas and the baptism of Christ and the presentation of Jesus, the Annunciation, the Holy Week and Easter, Pentecost. But then it ends on August 28th, just a few days before September 1st, with the Dormition of the Theotokos, the death of Mary, or the sleeping of Mary. And so the Eastern Orthodox liturgical year emphasizes Mary, which I think is super interesting. Now, you could, be critical of this, and you could say, well, that just means that these people are Mary worshipers and not Christ worshipers. But you could also say that, Mary, as the human representative to God's question of, will you be in relationship with me? She says yes. And so showing our potential for holiness, showing our potential for reconciliation with God, kind of, puts her in a place where we can connect with her more so than we can connect with, the perfection and the godliness of Jesus. And so we, through Mary's, in the same way that Eve disobeyed God and brought all of humanity with her, Mary obeyed God and then couldn't bring all of humanity with her, and represents for us perfect faith, perfect humility, perfect willingness to do what God desires for her. And so celebrating the birth of Mary at the beginning of the liturgical year, and they call it the sleeping of Mary at the end, rather than the death, kind of connects for Orthodox Christians. It connects more closely with their own lives than kind of the loftiness of Christ. And so you can see the birth of Mary in that yearly cycle of kind of starting again from there as a starting of, my own life. I have a new start. I have a new ability to be closer to being the person that God wants me to be. And then the they call it the dormition, or falling asleep, of Mary, because Orthodox don't believe that she died. They believe that she was assumed up into heaven. And so that is kind of a foreshadowing of the resurrection that all of us will experience later. So the idea being that focusing on Mary doesn't diminish the focus on Christ. It actually highlights Christ, because it shows the human response to him in a way that he himself can't do, because he's God. But Mary, being fully human, shows how God works through humans, and how humans can and should respond to God's work in the world. So that's what that's what I'll say in the kindest possible interpretation of all of this. As a Western Christian, it's a little, and especially as a Protestant Christian, it's a little challenging. But I think it's really interesting, because just think about all the different things that happen in our liturgical year that we just kind of take for granted, that are interpreted completely differently by having a different start to the year and having these different festivals kind of, bookending it. You know, everything can be interpreted in a completely different light. From the perspective of the same faith, right? We're all Christians, but to where we start, where we our brains think about us starting and ending matters. And so I think it's really interesting to think about all the possible ramifications of all that. So enough of that. I'll stop talking. Any comments on that?
I think you explained that about as well as humanly possible. uh, I mean, I guess that the calendar is a tool for humans, so why not have it based around a human? Is definitely a different perception, but it's not actually required. So
Yeah, it's super, like, because I had no idea. I had no idea that Orthodox didn't, consider Advent to be the beginning of the liturgical year. And so just the possibilities are endless. Like, you could go everywhere with that, and how it affects, the way that our brains make connections, and the assumptions that we make, and the things that we emphasize and de-emphasize. It's really interesting to me. Anybody else?
That is really interesting.
All right. So wrapping it up, thinking about kind of how do we how do we distill all of this down? And we've got things ranging from partying in the street and getting drunk, all the way to berating yourself for the sins that you have committed this year, and trying to commit yourself to doing better next year. But I think that there are some, there are some ways for us to kind of bring these things together, because certainly the celebration of newness, the hope and expectation of improvement whether that is improvement that comes from within or improvement that, we expect to come to us from outside of ourselves. The role of our relationships in making us who we are and giving us a future is important. The remembrance of things that have happened in the past, like with the Hijra, or several other traditions that we've talked about. Certainly, who we are and who we have been is important for us to acknowledge and recognize as we think about, what we want our future to look like, and to be able to have that kind of control over how things are going to unfold in the future. And so I think that, it makes a lot of sense that there's this diversity in terms of, what is the most important thing? Where do we find where do we locate ourselves in terms of the beginning, right? Like, what is the beginning for us? What is that moment in time from which we say, oh, yes, it's been this many years since this happened. And that's how we as a society decide that we um, are going to ground ourselves is really a fundamental part of kind of creating community culture and community identity. So it's really important and interesting. Any other threads that you see in any of this stuff, or your own experience and observation that you want to toss out there?
It seems like there's a common thread, through all of it. Um, the self-reflection and the renewal and um, family, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that there's always hope in all of it, right? Whether you're throwing parties and getting rid of the old and literally burning stuff that you don't like from last year, or whether you're, sitting and kind of contemplating problems that you've had and how you're going to do better in the future. All of that has to do with hope. And
Yeah.
obviously, if you don't have any hope whatsoever, then you can't live, you can't survive. But because we are creatures that look for meaning in our lives and don't just live them, I think there's something valuable to all the different ways that hope is manifest in our understanding of renewal and new year and new chances and all of that. So I think that's something that's kind of fundamental to humans, and so I think you're going to see that everywhere, which is interesting and a way for us to connect to other people.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Nope.
All right. Well, in that case, I thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a wonderful several more weeks, and we will gather again next month to talk about repentance and sin-related confession, things like that. It'll be a real joy. All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah. Thank
Good
you,
night.
Katie. Good to see everybody. Good
Bye.
to
Good
see you,
to see
Ryan
you.
and Karen.
Yeah.
Katie.